I'm going to step off the limb. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
20 July 1969 marked a revolutionary date for the history of man. It was the date that Neil Armstrong first set his one small step, the day that man left its footprint on the moon. Historically, this moment is often viewed as the accumulation and US victory in the space race. This, however, was not the end of the space race. Today, I am joined by Times Infinity to discuss the history of the space stations Skylab and Mir. While the space race is an interesting topic even on its own, today we will just focus on the space stations made after the moon landings. So the first space station we will discuss is NASA's Skylab, launched in 1973. Planning for a US-operated space station had already begun way back in 1969. Both the USSR and the USA had agreed to accept civilian research stations in orbit. In the USA, this was part of the Apollo's applications program. The rudimentary idea for Skylab, proposed by Wernher von Braun, was to use the cylindrical tube that was the second stage of the Saturn V rocket as a living space. The appropriate modifications for this were carried out by the McDonnell Douglas Corporation in the following years. In 1970, the name of the station was decided by NASA via a public contest. The stage had been set for America's Skylab. Skylab would be the first time NASA would have to consider extended habitability in space. Any previous missions had all been short in time span. The Apollo missions lasted less than 2 weeks, while Skylab was expected to operate much longer. Hence, modifications had to be made regarding living space and food supply.
Skylab launched on the 14th of May 1973. Almost immediately, there were problems. During launch, one of the station's heat shields was torn off and critically damaged one of the station's solar panels. When the station reached orbit, it was unable to extend the solar panel, thus creating a dangerous power shortage on board. The situation was later salvaged, but manned missions to Skylab had to be delayed by 11 days. On the 25th of May 1973, the first crew of Skylab finally launched. The crew would attempt repairs of Skylab, while a Skylab rescue team was on standby on the ground. The Skylab 2 mission, however, was a grand success. Using innovative methods and 2 unplanned spacewalks, the astronauts successfully repaired Skylab in what was at the time the largest repair ever done in space.
Skylab orbited the Earth between 1973 and 1979 and was occupied for 171 days and 13 hours of that time by 3 different crews. During their time aboard, they broke the previous human record of 23 days in space all the way to 84 days in space. Astronauts performed 10 spacewalks for over 42 hours. Skylab logged about 2,000 hours of scientific and medical experiments, making amongst others the first video of solar flares, Earth observations that were unprecedented, crews manufactured alloys, grew crystals, and learned how to work in space. But perhaps the greatest contribution of all was the new understanding of man's space requirements. Astronauts learned how to move, exercise, and bathe in zero-G environments.
The station, however, was not to last. Nearing the end of the 70s, the station's orbit began to decline, and attempts to rescue the station with the space shuttle program failed due to consistent delays. While the systems were still operational and ready for habitation, on the 11th of July 1979, Skylab, America's first manned space station, fell to Earth. Plans were to crash the station into the ocean off of South Africa, but its crash couldn't be predicted that accurately, causing panic in some nations such as the Philippines. But due to miscalculations, most of the debris landed in Western Australia. One Australian county, the Shire of Esperance, even fined NASA $400 for littering.
Back in 1969, however, when Neil Armstrong made his historical small step, an event that was marveled at worldwide, one of the few countries that did not broadcast the moon landing live was the Soviet Union. Since second arrival was equal to admitting failure in the eyes of the Soviets, their lunar program was abandoned in favor for creating the first space station. The Salyut program had begun.
The first Salyut space station was ready in 1971. While the first Salutes were, well, the first Salyut manned mission had to return to Earth due to failure to dock, while the second mission succeeded to dock and stayed on board for 23 days. The first time in history a space station had actually been manned. The crew, however, was all killed on re-entry, bringing a severe blow to Soviet morale. Over the next couple of years, however, the Salyut program began to receive massive upgrades. The addition of a second docking port, for example, meant the station could be resupplied by an unmanned mission, meaning the Soviets could, in theory, stay in space indefinitely. Early Salyut space stations only typically stayed in orbit for a year or so. Later Salyuts stayed in orbit for far longer, such as Salyut 7, which orbited the Earth for nearly a decade, showing the progress being made. In the years leading up to the Salyut 7, the Soviets would also invite cosmonauts from Poland and Czechoslovakia onto their program. Contrary to Skylab, the Salyut program was much more efficient though. Skylab was mostly decommissioned after 3 crews, so that NASA could push the space shuttle program. However, the limitations of the Salyuts were found in its living space. The next generation of space station would have to be a lot larger.
And the next generation of space station was found in Mir, which means the world in Russian. Mir still had only one docking port on the main station, but now a transfer component with 5 docking ports was added. With these in place, Mir had room to grow. In 1986, just mere weeks after the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, the core module of Mir was launched. On 15 March, the first crew boarded. They activated the life support, system computers and communication system. The first add-on module was added for off-dockings. Over time, 4 more modules would expand Mir into a fully functional habitat in space. Mir was roughly the size of a 2-bedroom apartment, but space was used way more efficiently. For the first time, humans truly could stay in space indefinitely.
Throughout the time Mir was operational, cosmonauts overcame numerous challenges thrown at them by space, among which the different crews were a variety of technical and mechanical problems. 320 kilometers above ground, Mir was also the ideal spot for Earth scientific research. Over 19,000 scientific experiments were conducted on Mir during its operation. The biggest of all remained the study of adaptability of humans to life in space. This overarched the study of both physical and mental changes, such as bone marrow density, as well as the psychological condition of the cosmonauts, which were closely monitored off the ground.
But for all its achievements, Mir could not escape the gravity of world politics below, and as the Soviet Union crumbled in 1991, financial support for the station ran dry. The new Russian Federation, which would take over the program, found itself unable to master the financial support Mir needed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, NASA would also find itself increasingly struggling to secure funds from Congress. Nearly 10 years after Ronald Reagan had given the ISS his blessing, not a single component had yet been built. The time seemed ripe for the 2 former rivals to join forces.
In its final days, Mir became sort of a prototype international space station, with the space shuttle Atlantis making its historical docking. The space station now harboured a sustained American-Russian presence. However, during this time, the dire situation of the station became increasingly evident as a fire erupted on the station in 1997, and a docking collision 2 months later, damaging the station and module. With the station now leaking air, desperate repair attempts were made. Even though they were successful, the station's dangerous situation left NASA to withdraw from Mir to focus on the new International Space Station. Without NASA funding, this would prove to be the final nail in Mir's coffin, as Russia could not afford to keep the station running on its own. And after 9 years of operation, the station was abandoned, bringing an end to a glorious era of space exploration.
And thus concludes the story of man's early ventures into space, us learning how to stay in space for sustained periods of time. Mir and Skylab taught us the essentials of space travel and paved the way for the International Space Station and Lunar Gateway after it. This video was made in collaboration with Times Infinity. If you want to learn more about the Lunar Gateway, head over to his channel for his part in this collab. Thank you all for watching and see you soon in the next videos.